Welcome, everybody, to the Bangers and Classics podcast with me, James Ruppert, and him, David Malloy. And hello, David. How are you?
Fine, thank you, James. Good afternoon to you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm extremely well. There's been quite impressive works going on at my compound. I always used to enjoy the fact that when I listened to the news many years ago, they used to talk about the Kennedy compound. So I always like to refer to wherever I live as my compound. I've no idea what a compound should be. I presume it should have a tennis court, which I don't have, and a swimming pool and things like that. But never mind. But we've been having big holes being dug, and that's been quite interesting to watch. But apart from that, I haven't got my hands dirty. And any big holes being dug where you are, apart from personal ones?
No, I just dig holes all the time and sort of fall into them, basically, yeah. Someone used to say about me, I only ever open my mouth to change feet, and that's probably true. However, can we start by going back to last week? And I talked about an advertisement, TV commercial for Shell Petroleum. Now, I got the Shell bit right, but I got the colour of the car wrong. I found the ad again, had to look at it, and I said it was a Guards Red Porsche 944. And shockingly, it's actually a silver 944. The rest of the ad's right. It's as good as ever. You can find it on YouTube if you search Shell Petrol Making the Most of Motoring. That's the name it's given on YouTube. The actual name of the ad is Open Road. I think it won an award or was in contention for one in the mid-80s. Good ad anyway. But there's a couple of points arising from that, if I just take a couple of seconds. First one is, I've always been interested in trying to find out where it was shot. I can see the Ribblehead Viaduct in some shots, but does anyone out there know where the filling station was located and other roads were? If so, can you send us an email? We'll give you the email address, etc. later. Other thing is that Tony Scott, who directed it, obviously went on to direct Top Gun and various other films, made one of the classic adverts for cars of all time. It's a Saab advert. It's entitled Nothing on Earth Comes Close. It's kind of like the start of Top Gun, except with a Swedish saloon car in it. Check it out on YouTube. It's really, really well made. And this leads to my third point. I'm going to bring in James in a second. But the third point is, if you look at the 944 in the ad, it's got absolutely gorgeous Fuchs alloys, black wheels, silver rims, look lovely. Now, my question to James is this. Any particular wheels you like or dislike, James?
I like all the wheels on my car because they make they make the car move. So I'm really, really happy with all of them. But actually, I do think I have all the most fabulous wheels on my cars that I think have ever been invented. Because I have Mini Cooper reverse rims on my Mini Cooper. It actually technically shouldn't have them because it wasn't sold with them. But when I got it 40 years ago, it had them on. And if you want a steel wheel, I mean, that is almost the ultimate steel wheel. It's sort of just the right size. It fits under the arches. You don't have to flare the arches to get it in, and it looks very purposeful. So I think I've done quite well there. I've got Alpina alloys, which on my E21, and I think most people, when they think about alloy wheels, that is one of the classic ones. It is a turbine shape, motif, and I mean, if you can't afford a real Alpina, well, at least you can have Alpine alloys, which I think are very, very good looking. And then I've got the steel wheels on a Land Rover, which I think are pretty good. I've also got a graveyard of metric alloy wheels in my garden, which I'll have to do something with at some point. But really, people, if you ever see an advert and there's metric wheels on a vehicle and someone's trying to sell it, it's probably because they cannot find any replacements for the particular tyres. It's so difficult. I've tried a few times in my life, and I've ended up with like the last one in the shop, or the last one in the country, or the last one that somebody would sell me. But really, I mean, again, there's been some very pretty alloy wheels. The cross-spoke BMW metric alloys are very, very nice. But again, they look nice, but they're not going to take you anywhere because you can't get tyres to fit them. But that's it roughly for me. Apart from Land Rover steel wheels, which are basically like lorry wheels, really. But those are very, very pretty indeed. So I like practical ones. I mean, you talking about the Fuchs alloys. I would assume you like the speedy ones rather than the practical ones like me.
Probably, yeah. It goes back to my youth. When I was a kid, a lot of cars had row style wheels. If you're listening to this from the USA, we're talking about Magnum 500 wheels because that's what they're called there. Obviously, wheel-face slot mags, seen in some Jaguars back in the mid-70s and on early Lotus Esprits, therefore extremely cool. And then, of course, you've got possibly an underrated set of alloys. It's the Saab three-spoke alloys. I think they're from the 80s. Wonderful looking cars. Wonderful looking alloys. One thing I don't like of James is black alloys. To me, it looks like brake dust. And maybe I can explain this. When I was a kid, I had an extremely house-proud mother. So if I sat, stood, or lay anywhere around the house for too long, I was either washed, dusted, or vacuumed. And sometimes it was all three. So I guess anything that looks dirty and black wheels to me look like brake dust, I'm not too keen on. Having said that, black wheels are fine if, and only if, in my view, they've got silver rims, then they can look fantastic. Just my opinion, though. Perhaps yours is different.
No, I would agree with you. I think an alloy wheel is meant to be aluminium. You should see the aluminium. You should see your unsprung weight in full view. And if you're painting them, you're actually adding weight to your wheel. So I would have thought that's a complete no-no. And actually, the three-spoke Saab alloys, as you say, are actually a thing of beauty. But I did have them on several Saab 9000s in the early 90s, so they were around. I think they did make it. I think into the certainly to the early to middle 1990s. But yeah, one of the best looking wheels without any doubt at all.
And no doubt somebody will call in or contact us and say, what about Citroen Alloys? Again, if you look at the CX era, there were some great wheels there. Unfortunately, my knowledge of Citroen isn't good enough for me to tell you the names of them, but well worth checking out. One other thing about wheels, James, you mentioned unsprung weight.
Yeah.
Where do you stand in large wheels? The sort of wheels nowadays than cars that look as if they've been taken off, like a stagecoach.
No, I really can't. I can't be having that at all. I can't be having those spinner things that they have in the States as well, where the thing keeps spinning when the wheels stopped. But no, as you say, very very thin rubber doesn't do it for me. A few years ago, I had a 7 Series, and somebody commented, "What you've got there is balloon tyres," and yeah, they were just very thick. But it meant that the ride was beautiful. I didn't crash and bang everywhere. It just meant that it rode so much better, and I don't think it makes a car look cooler or better, or I don't think it handles better or does anything better at all. It just looks stupid. I think it just sort of says, I don't know anything about cars or driving, or I've got there is. Maybe if you've got a thick rubber, it just means that you've got a bad back, like you and me, David, because we're very old, and that's the only reason. But yeah, thin tires, I can't be having.
Yeah, I'm not too keen on big wheels myself because they do add to the unsprung weight, and that basically destroys the ride of the car.
Yeah.
Might be great for the Nürburgring, but how many cars, how many of them are going to see the Nürburgring? They've got to cope with British roads in the 21st century. And basically, a car that hovers a couple of feet off the ground would be ideal for our roads nowadays. And on that note, perhaps we should take a very, very quick break. You're listening to the Bangers and Classics podcast with James Rupert and David Malloy. Check out our website at www.bangersandclassics.com. So in spite of appearances outside, spring is coming, James, and in the spring we all know what a petrolhead's thoughts turn to, and that's convertibles. Now, let's have a think about this. Supposing you want to buy a convertible or recommend, a pretty little ragtop to somebody who didn't want to spend more than about $2,500. Is there anything you'd particularly suggest, James?
Well, strangely enough, I mean, we've mentioned Saabs today, and I would mention Saabs again. So a Saab 900 or 993. I mean, you get people criticising them hugely because they're all floppy and everything, but that's really not the point of a convertible unless you're going to buy a Caterham and you want to go around the corner sideways. Saabs are fantastically cheap. They still look extremely modern as well. There's a few knocking around near me, and you look at them and you think, well, they haven't really dated at all, have they? and you can pick those up for just a couple of thousand. I think they're great value. And you might be able to get some of those 3-spoke alloys as well. So you'll look the coolest cat on the street. My old favourites, any BMW 3 Series, still seem to be extremely good value, especially with the larger 6-cylinder engines. You can get a 330 or a 325, and again, from about 10-15 years ago, you're pretty much getting down to a couple of grand, and those I think are fantastic value. And the other thing, I was talking to some people off the telly, David, and they told me, because they know what they're talking. When I asked them, I just asked them, what car should one buy, and they said an MX-5. And I don't know if you've got any comments on that at all.
Yeah, well, it's well known that I'm not exactly the greatest fan of MX-5s. Put it this way, when they came out, I would be early 20s, and I referred to them at the time as a sports car for daily express readers. I've never really changed my view. I suppose my enmity comes from this. People suggested, it's a new Lotus Elan. Well, the original Lotus Elan back in the 60s redefined performance and handling in that sector. The MX-5 didn't. It's a perfectly acceptable little sports car, but it's not the second coming of the sports car. That's my beef with it, really. Good friend of mine's got one. Bought it from Japan. Rust free, looks after it. Nice car, but not for me. I just wouldn't want one. If you want a Lotus Elan, you buy one from the 60s or you buy one from the 90s. Both brilliant cars. But if you want something else, a traditional rear-wheel drive car that's perhaps a little bit more reliable than the Elan from the 60s, and a lot cheaper as well, then, well, you've got your MX-5. But I wouldn't go for one of them. If I wanted a rear-wheel drive roadster, I would probably look at BMW Z4. I've had a couple of these. One was a good experience, one wasn't so good. The 6-cylinder versions are very good, creamily smooth engines, good to drive. Only thing is, most rear-wheel drive cars, on a wet road, they can be a little bit of a handful, if you're not very careful with them, which leads me to a quick recommendation. If you've got a car like that, what to do if you're buying tyres is always buy tyres with the best wet weather rating you can find. Forget about the dry. You're not going to run out of grip in the dry. When you need grip, most of all, is in the wet. But come back to the Z4. Some issues with the Vanos and the roof motor, the latter can be solved by moving it. Basically, water gets into it. But the good cars, very attractive to look at. On a nice sunny day, they're great to drive. I prefer them to the MX-5 considerably. I'd rather probably have had them, if it wasn't limited to 2,500, I'd go for a Fiat Barchetta or I'd go for the Elan M100, both of which I really like, particularly the Elan. And there's also, if you're more traditionalist and you want, again, rear-wheel drive, the MGF and TF, a few things to watch out for there that are well documented. But again, nice, attractive little British sports cars, good fun to drive. Don't cost you to buy, and really, why not?
Absolutely. And also the thing to remember, I think, is to have the roof open at every possible opportunity. Otherwise, it's pointless.
Except when you're testing them. That's a top tip. Because if you get the roof down, if there's a few strange noises coming from the engine bay or underneath, you might not catch them with the roof stowed away. So have it up, part of the test.
Absolutely. And as you say, I mean, you were referring to electric roof operation, which again is, don't get carried away, because the problem with buying a convertible is it's tremendously exciting. So what you need to do is take a cynical person with you. I always find that's the best person, someone who doesn't think it's a very good idea. Sometimes that's a spouse.
Anyway, moving on from that, going into the past rather than the future, UFO. Do you remember the Jerry Anderson TV series from the late 60s, early 70s, James?
Oh, I'm extremely familiar with it, and all the shadow things that went with it.
Yep, Shadow. If you don't know what Shadow is, folks, it stands for Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization. This TV series, I believe it was Jerry Anderson's first live-action TV series, some years before he did Space 1999, and in my view, it's a better series. But if you're a petrolhead, one of the things you'd be interested in it, or one of the things to interest you in UFO would be the cars. Do you know much about the cars, James?
Not as much as you, David, so you better tell us.
Okay. Well, basically, there were two cars that make regular appearances in it. They've got gull wings. One's purple, and the other, which is driven by Commander Straker, who's the sort of head honcho of Shadow, is bronze. They were actually built for a film made by Jerry Anderson around about the same time called Journey. I think it was Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, otherwise known as Doppelganger. And these cars they look really futuristic. They sound as if they get gas turbine engines, but they don't. Basically, they're built on a Ford Zephyr, I think a Zephyr 4 chassis. They've got Ford 1.6 litre engines. They were styled by a chap called Derek Meddings, who was a real sci-fi guru for Jerry Anderson Productions, and later on, I think, Superman and James Bond films as well. And they were built by Alan Mann Racing. And as we indicated, they've got gull-wing doors. Unfortunately, the gull-wing doors wouldn't stay up on their own. So you'll see it in the TV series with the gull-wing doors up. What you don't see is it's either attached to a piece of string holding it up, or there's a prop guy just out of shot holding it in place. Cars went into into private ownership after the series finished, and a certain Radio 1 disc jockey owned one. That particular car ended its days in a backyard in a garden in England. But apparently there was a chap who's a real fan of the show, went up to the car, took some moulds from it, and it's going to produce a replica. Don't think it's turned up real yet, but it's well worth looking out for. Any other thoughts on that, James?
Not really. When I watched the series, and it is being repeated on a channel at the moment, so it is possible to enjoy it in all its sort of very late 60s, early 70s glory. I have spotted a Jensen in the car park, so that I found to be tremendously exciting. But as you say, it does have a turbine whir as the car moves around. But it is just the overall style of the whole program is just all tremendously exciting, and it was set in 1980, which I don't remember 1980 being like that at all. Unfortunately, with a place you could live on in the moon, but maybe that's to come.
Yeah, I don't think it was just the cars you were interested in, though, James, was it?
Certainly not, but the Ladies of Shadow. If there's any gentlemen watching that, we're not going to go into this, but they were just absolutely remarkable, really, and it was something to keep a young man interested, and now an much older man is very interested in watching it as well for those reasons.
Indeed. I'll just say one thing about one of the actresses. If you're into sort of folk music, you may have heard of a guy called Nick Drake, who was around in the late 60s, early 70s, unfortunately died tragically young. His sister's in it, and she's one of the aforementioned ladies, and I think we probably better leave it there. We'll pause again for a word from our sponsors. We'd love you to get in touch with your views on the podcast and indeed any other points you wish to make. You can contact us by sending an email to James and David at bangersandclassics.com. It's all lowercase, and I'll repeat it again, James and David at bangersandclassics.com. Okay, after a little break, I want to pass this to James to look at what I might call an unheralded classic. Are there any cars out there, James, classic cars that you feel are underrated by the public or the press?
Yeah, it is actually quite a difficult question to answer, because in many ways, any car that's sort of survived to now, you sort of think, deserves a pat on the head, even if you think it's rubbish. It's a bit like standard Vanguards, which were terrible cars at the time. I remember talking to someone who used to sell them, and they never used to move from the showroom at all. And when they did, they fell apart pretty rapidly. So, kudos to them for still being around if somebody still loves them. But I think it's Auto Bianchi, which is a very obscure Italian mark, basically Fiat's, but slightly different, maybe Fiat's with a twist. And I do just like the look of those, and just the fact that they are, it is like the classic Italian small city car, but it's the one that nobody knows about.
Yeah. Here's a little bit of trivia for folks.
Yeah.
The Fiat X19, when it was originally shown as a concept car, was, I believe, called an Auto Bianchi then. That was his name it was given. Can't remember what the model designation was, but it wore that badge, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think you could well have been right. And also your pronunciation is far better than mine, I've noticed. I've got a very London rubbish one, and you've got a very one as though you were actually brought up in the hills of Turin.
Yeah, hiding from the mafia, probably.
Absolutely. And what about you, David? Do you think anything's overlooked? Maybe MX-5, something like that?
Oh, yeah, very much overlooked by me, but that's on purpose. No, one I think it's maybe a bit of a surprise choice, Citroen Diane. It's a little more than a 2CV with a hatchback, produced for 16 years, 1.4 million made. But it's not a fast car, obviously. It's a two-cylinder air-cooled engine, It rolls on wet grass. Still very enjoyable to drive. But there's so many good things about it. It's very practical. Also, with the opening rear door, it's got a fairly low sill. It's got a flat floor. You can lift the rear seats out. And, of course, you've got a full-length sunroof, so you can get all manner of stuff in it. The air-cooled engine hasn't got much power, but, You okay, James? There's an awful noise there.
No, that's either the American Air Force or the British Air Force. We have Air Forces near us who patrol the skies and keep us safe. So that's what that was.
Okay, well, we'll re-record that. We'll maybe leave that in, actually.
Yeah, that's quite good, actually, isn't it?
Yep. So after that interruption by one of the Air Forces, we hope it was a friendly one.
Yeah.
We'll go back to talking about the Citroen Diane. Basically, it's good. Oh, here they come again.
No, I know, it's fantastic. Yeah, they do put on some very good displays from time to time. If you can catch them, you can see them dog fighting around. And also in the summer when there used to be air displays, we used to get some quite good fly pasts as well.
Of course, you live in bomber country, though.
Very much
bomber country.
Absolutely, yeah. We certainly do. So we get very good stuff coming over. The highlight of my life actually was a Lancaster, which obviously doesn't operate out of either an American or British base anymore. But you could hear that. I had no idea it was coming, and you could hear it from such a long way away. And it was very low as well, but it was just the most magnificent thing ever.
Yeah, it reminds me of a summer day back in mid-80s. I was a summer job working at a woodyard in Melton Mowbray. And it was lunchtime, out in the sun. I hear this sort of strange noise in the sky. I look up. It's the Lancaster. It was the BBMF. It was the Lancaster, the Spitfire, and the Hurricane coming over, maybe 500, 600 feet up. Just absolutely spine-chilling stuff. So regal is the word I'd use.
Well, no, I mean, all I would say, David, is, when you actually think about the Triumph Spitfire, now there's a small roadster that is completely and utterly forgotten about now, but it survived for a very long time. I mean, everybody thinks MGB or midget, but really, the Spitfire was, a fairly good little car. I know it had some interesting handlings, certainly in its early days, if you didn't know what you were doing. But it was a stalwart of the British Leyland lineup, certainly towards the end. But it was just quite brilliant, and especially when you could just lever forward the bonnet, and you would have sort of unparalleled access to the engine, which you obviously needed because it was built by British Leyland at Speak. But strange enough, my sister bought one. She bought one of our very last ones, 1980, and it was brand new. And I remember driving that. I remember it was really quite an interesting car. It was very low. I mean, you talk about being low to the ground. I mean, that really was. You really did feel as though you were sort of underneath lorries and stuff. But it was quite good fun and very, very different, and it's quite nice. And again, takes us back to car names from the other week. Yeah,
indeed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a guy who I was at, I was at university with him, but I also worked with him for a little while. He's got one. He's had since about the mid-80s. Saved up, bought one for not a lot of money back in probably about 86 or so, and he's still got it today. And it's still used regularly, keeps it in really good nick. He lives in the village next to me now, and occasionally see him belting around in it in summertime, which is great. That was one of the later ones I think he bought, so doesn't have the, shall we say, interesting handling characteristics of the earlier models. One last thing about the Diane, as I indicated, they made 1.4 million of the things. In Britain, as at the last published figures, there were 275 on the road, 355 on Sorn, which is about 10% of the number of 2CVs. So they are getting pretty rare. So if you go, something you'd like to buy, now is a good time before they become even thinner on the ground. And on that note, I'll pass you over to James.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good recommendation to go out and buy. And also, I think one of the things we didn't stray onto was replacement cars for the UFO series.
We didn't, did we?
We didn't, no. And my only suggestion was a Nova kit car because the roof might actually work, because it wasn't just the doors that went up; it was the whole centre section, wasn't it? Which is quite a remarkable design feature.
Sort of a clamshell, effectively, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. The only other thing I could think of from that era that looked a bit futuristic would be Piper GTT. Very futuristic looking car for the mid-1960s, and I think that would have looked very much in place. I mean, Straker you could have given the car he had, but for his subordinate Paul Foster, a younger chap, bachelor, give him the Piper, the Man About Town car.
Yeah, absolutely.
Used it to impress those gorgeous ladies we were talking about.
The Ladies of Shadow, absolutely. But also we can come back to Citroen again, because the default futuristic car has always been, and sometimes it continues to be, the Citroen DS. They always seem to shoehorn that in as not realizing it. It dates from the 50s, or maybe it does, but they don't care, filmmakers. But it just looks like the future, and strangely enough, it still does. And that would have fitted right in. The 60s, 70s aesthetic.
Yeah, if you're going for a futuristic car now, Renault Aventime, there's one. Actually did appear in a film.
Right.
You wouldn't recognise it. It was modified a bit for the film, but the film called Children of Men, made in I think about 2006, used the Aventime. I think they only used one roadworthy version and various other ones, but I know the chap who owns the one that's capable of being driven. He bought it from the film company's disposal unit. I suppose fortune favours the bold, because he was lucky enough to see it. A lot of people would have loved to have owned that car, but didn't spot the ad.
No, that's right.
And such is life.
That's right. I know we're going down a sort of a time tunnel here, but but one of your favourite marks, David, which would be Lotus, and there was that Scarlett Johansson film a few years ago, where all they used was elites and eclats and all sorts. And I cannot remember the name of the film now. Ghost in the Shell, based in Japan. You should really watch it, David, because you will be in a right old state.
I'm going to have to watch that now. So that wraps it up for another episode of the Bangers and Classic podcast. And leaves me only just to say thank you for listening, and thank you to James.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Another very successful podcast, I think, but we'll let the listeners be the judge of that.
Indeed. Oh, and if you want to contact us, just please do it via the Bangers and Classic website, www.bangersandclassic.com. We'll be delighted to hear from you. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.